Hello and welcome to Art and Self. I'm Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator, the Curated Connections Library, and the Art and Self Connection Circle. This is a podcast where we experience the range and depth of what it means to be human, seen through our connections and conversations about works of art. These art conversations are here to show you that art is here for you as a catalyst, a challenger, a coach, and a comfort. Before we get started, take a moment to fill up your lungs with a deep breath. Connect with your body and your mind and your spirit, and get ready to discover what art has to show you. I am so excited to welcome Yola Mehmeti to the podcast. Welcome, Yola.
Hi, Cindy. When I put it on my calendar, it's like, for me, it's like a Christmas morning today. So I'm excited
Awesome.
to be here.
Yeah, I am so excited to have you here. So Yola and I have been working together on and off for several years now, and she's absolutely amazing. So I'm so excited that you guys get to know her. You all get to know her during this podcast. But for our listeners, can you introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about, what you like to do?
My favorite part ever. Oh, boy. I live in New York City. I'm going to start there because I feel I'm a tourist through and through, and I'm so much about the space. And so I'm going to start introducing myself by saying I live in New York City and I help people activate spaciousness in their life. I mostly work with entrepreneurs of different kinds of entrepreneurs. And I am very passionate about helping others release the layers that they don't even know are there in order to create space. Because when that spaciousness is activated, the things that we want in our lives magically, as I like to say, start to pour in. And so I'm all about being aware of our relationship with space, like our physical space where we live and work, our relationship with time, and our relationship with our relationships. Those are like the three main components that come up and we utilize in the work that I do with clients.
Excellent. Yeah, it's always fun to hear you explain your work because so much of what you do is unexplainable. Even when I try to explain it to other people, I'm like,
exactly.
I can't explain it, but you should do it.
Yeah. And it's I give people, it's better felt and experienced than actually explained. And I've been studying energy healing work for 18 years now, in this lifetime anyway. I believe in reincarnation. I believe in past lives. And I believe that you have had many lifetimes of doing our work. And with each lifetime, we get to refine our magic. And so in this lifetime, I've been studying energy healing work and things about the subconscious and belief works and things of that sort for the last 18 plus years. And it really started with it's funny because it started the introduction by saying I'm all about the space and grounding. My journey with being interested in alternative health and energy healing work started with my digestive system, and I was eating all the healthy foods, but I kept feeling bloated, and that's what my body led me to researching and embarking on this journey. And so it's been interesting, and I feel that I am always we're always evolving. So how I explain what I do now, it's not going to sound the same the next time I say it, because I believe that and which is why I'm so excited about this sit down with you. I believe everything is energy, and everything we do tweaks and shifts that energy. And so I'm so excited to dive into this, what I have called for you, its own energy healing session, its own energy healing container.
Yeah.
And to connect it with art, like looking at a piece of art is its own energy healing session. And if you allowed it to be, if you let it touch you in ways that it is meant to touch you.
Yeah. And for those of you listening too, this, I think, where I have gone in my business in the last 2 years, so much of that was spent with me and Yola having conversations on Voxer back and forth about my work and about, what I'm actually doing when I'm talking about a work of art with people. And it really is, you got me through a lot of that hard time where I was kind of really trying to piece it together.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite memories of my work that I've done, just all of the work that I have done so far in my life one of my favorite memories is seeing your face when I remember in a session without, giving away, respecting your privacy, of course. But I just remember like the look on your face when it clicked for you that, your relationship with art and what you've been doing with art and why you were interested in art to begin with is because that's your energy healing tool and medicine. And you have come here to bridge that, the gap between, art is only for the people who get it and the people who have the money and the artist or whatever, and the everyday person, and to bridge that gap through the power of energy. Because we're all energy, then that's a common denominator. So when you look at art and when I first reflected that to you, I will never forget that look on your face. And
I know exactly the moment. I know exactly the moment you're talking about. It really was like, because I always knew that my connection with art was different, that it was something else that people weren't talking about, but I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to understand it. And, our conversation.
I'm covered in chills right now.
I know. I just got them too. That's so funny. Yeah. So my arms and my legs. Awesome. Okay. Well, with that, let us dive into the art. So I'm going to show you 4 works of art. I'm going to tell the titles just so the people listening can know what I'm showing you, but don't spend too much time thinking about the titles because the titles are irrelevant. We want to only look at the image.
Thank you for saying that, because I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you for saying that, because in my intro, I forgot to say that I'm also a writer, a poet, and words. So thank you for giving me that nudge, because I can so dive into the words.
Yeah, I give that instruction to everyone, but also I know in particular you are one that's going to be like, the title. Let's talk about the title for the next hour. Let's throw the painting out. Let's talk about the title.
Thank you.
Okay. And then, that's just really feel into the art, whatever just gives you that jolt of excitement or energy or whatever you feel when you look at it. So the first one is, the artist is named Chen Ke, and I don't know the title on this one actually, but it's in the exhibit. The Real Deal is Talking with Dad. We have Marilyn by Audrey Flack. We have Dream of Wings by Kelsey Loomer. And then we have Birthday by Dorothea Tanning.
Wow, they're stunning. I wish this podcast episode was 5 hours. We could describe. So the one that hit me right away was the first one.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm like, and then the second, the one that I would choose second would be the third one.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
And now I'm like, what?
Well, I think we go with the first instinct because that's usually the right one. And I always try to guess which one people are going to choose. And this is the one I guessed. So I'm not always right, but this is the one I guessed.
A taste of my own medicine. You're like, the first instinct.
Awesome. Okay. So let's start with a description. So why don't you go ahead and describe what you see, and then I'll fill in any gaps that I also notice.
What I see is it's in what it looks like an empty room. There is this, oh gosh, what's the word for it in English? I was going to say an old version suitcase, but people use
a trunk.
A trunk. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like a trunk vertically standing vertically, standing up. And inside the trunk, there is a naked, sitting sort of in the fetus position, a woman, I guess. Looks like a woman. And the trunk, I noticed that the inside of the trunk, there is this green velvety, layer. And then obviously the trunk is open. So on the cover part of it, there are 2 pieces of art inside the trunk, on the door, on the inside of the top of it. And one of them they're all about nature, actually, bodies of water and big rocks. And it's for the art of work is, it's divided in 2, but it's throughout the length of the entire top of the top of the trunk. And then on the side, on the inside, where this woman is sort of sitting, hold with her knees to her chest, I see that it's almost like she's sitting in nature, because there is a layer of there is this its own image. It's like she's sitting in nature, but she's sitting inside the trunk. I don't know if I'm missing anything in describing this. And then I also noticed that there is a window in this room all the way to the far left, upper left-hand corner. And on the window, there is another little piece of art that is, that is against the window. And also it looks like it's a nature type of, image.
Yeah. When I found this artwork, I was on this artist's website and she had pictures of this exhibit. So it was like this room is an exhibit of all of her work. And then this was one of the artworks in the image. So I cropped this artwork out so we could just focus on it, but it is part of a larger exhibit. So that stuff, like the little face in the background you see, that's just like another artwork in the background.
The little image the face. Wow.
Yeah.
There's a little face. Okay, got it.
So that's just something else back there.
Right. And so basically what you are saying is that this is actually, I'm just realizing like the room is it's real. And it's like the trunk is actually an installation.
Yep. So this is a sculpture.
A sculpture. Okay.
I guess is what you would call it.
Right.
Yeah, I would call it a sculpture. It could be called an installation too. But I would say a sculpture.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Because I thought actually at first it was like, like a painting of this. I didn't know it was the actual trunk.
Yeah, it's an actual trunk.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Yeah, so I think your description was great. The things that I would bring up is that the woman painted in the interior of the trunk is larger than the landscape. So like she's got her hand on the top of a tree. So she is really large within that landscape. And then, I think everything else it looks like it's painted like oil paint inside the trunk. So her body is on one side of the trunk is the back of her, and then the bottom of the trunk is the front half of her. So she is painted. Yeah. They're painted on the interior of the trunk.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. But I think that
is interesting. And it's funny because I kind of noticed the face above, but it's like I kind of dismissed. I didn't see it was a face, and then I dismissed it. I thought I was thinking.
Yeah, so it's not really part of it. I mean, we could always come up with meaning of it, but we can just focus on the trunk part.
Yeah.
Okay, so after our description, what do you think is going on here? What is calling you first in the artwork to discuss?
One of the things, I mean, there's so much, and it's like, where do I begin? But one of the things that stood out to me are like the beautifully carved like metal pieces. Like around the trunk. And I mean, you can tell if they're metal, and like the trunk is made out of wood, I guess. It looks like a wooden trunk. And I find the thing that comes up for me is I find like I love how they are these metal pieces, but they're carved and they're beautiful, and they kind of mimic or mirror the images, the art that is painted inside the top of the trunk with like this rocks on the water. Like I see the arches and the curves. I see that like even the color, I see that imitation that exists between the mirroring effect that exists. And it's interesting because these like, would you call them rocks or like mountains or like little islands almost?
Like hilly islands.
Yeah.
There's some trees, but not a lot, just sort of little grassy islands.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm talking about what's coming up, the word mirroring. And yet like in the water itself is like this body of water is like this big mirror. So that mirroring effect. And I love the metal, but then when I think of metal, I think of like how it is cold to the touch. And I see the connection between the metal that like decorates the trunk, but also it's functional because like that's how you would close the trunk, and the connection between that and like this naked woman sitting inside, it's almost like, ooh, it's like, I mean, she seems very comfortable, but me looking at her, I feel cold just looking at her.
Oh, wow.
And so like just the connection between the metal and like how metal can be like such, a cold element. and like her being naked.
Yeah.
So that's something that's coming up.
Yeah. And two, as you were talking, I started to think about just the nature of a trunk in general and what those metal pieces function are. And most of those are function to close and lock the trunk and to keep all the wood pieces together. Like it has
Mm-hmm.
this function to it. And it makes me think of like what we normally use trunks for is like, storing memories, storing blankets, like I'm envisioning like the crochet blankets that I don't have a trunk in my house, but if I did have a trunk in my house, I can imagine the crochet blankets that my grandma made for my babies, like the special, like precious things that I
Yeah.
would put into that
Yeah.
trunk.
Yeah, I love that. It's like what I'm hearing you say is like you would put things that you would treasure, even though, now that you described it too, now I understand that this woman is painted on the inside of the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
First reaction was she is inside of the trunk. It wasn't like a paint, like yes, it was maybe a painted image, but the fact that she's inside the trunk.
Oh yeah.
And there is this feeling of there is this juxtaposition between feeling safe and feeling claustrophobic.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause she doesn't look like she looks like my daughter when my daughter's curled up like that, like playing with leaves on the ground. She liked to play in the water, play in the grass. She likes to, tinker with the ground. And it's very much calming for me to watch her do that. And she's like, just in her own world, completely unaware that anybody is watching her. She's just in it. And that's what I feel from this girl. She just is lost in her own world.
Yeah. And she seems quite comfortable doing that. And then the element in the painting that, that she's naked, I feel it's an invitation for us to see how comfortable are we in our own skin. Because I feel like when you see someone naked, it's not them being naked that might trigger us. It's us being reflected back, our sense of vulnerability and how comfortable we feel in our own skin about anything and everything, not just, like our body, our physical body. And there is a part of me that feels like I want to have her confidence. I want to have her, and her confidence comes through from her quietness.
Yeah. Because you could read that body language as, she's trying to cover herself. She's trying to knees up to the chest and everything as this sense of
Protection.
Self-consciousness. Yeah. But I don't get that from her.
I don't get that either.
Energy. Yeah.
I don't get that.
Especially if you think about it, like look how the scale of this, if she were to stand up in this space, she'd be as tall, taller than mountains. The trees come up to her ankles. So she's not only naked in this space, but she's a giant. She's a giant naked woman in this space. And it's interesting to me.
And I think you make a great point, because I feel like the scale of her in comparison to the paintings and the images at the trunk, I would say says a lot about us picking up on her confidence, her level of comfortableness, she, even though at first, when I first saw the image, my first reaction was to be closed in and scared, because that's the first. But then once you start diving into the layers of it, and really, honestly, once you have a few more seconds with it, when that initial sort of shock has worn off, all you see is a level of comfortableness that feels very reassuring.
Yeah. I thought that too. The first time I saw it, I was like, oh gosh, that would be terrible. That would be just absolutely terrible. And it made me think one of my worst nightmares. Did you watch Punky Brewster when you were a kid?
No.
There's an episode of Punky Brewster where this girl gets trapped in a refrigerator, like an old refrigerator. They're playing hide and seek and then she gets locked in. And so I have been terrified of getting trapped in a refrigerator ever since I watched this one episode. But when I look at this, that's what I view as that terror of being in that closed box. Oh, and then there was Days of Our Lives where they locked the girl and she was buried alive. I don't know if you saw that one, but my childhood shows traumatizing me from
Oh
being
my
trapped.
gosh. Yeah. And honestly, I chose this image because even though you told me not, I mean, I chose this image because it really hit me. And then I saw the title and what was the title?
I
Without
don't remember.
something about a real talk with dad.
Something about dad, yeah.
And I just had a vulnerable conversation with my dad last night. And I'm like, how did Cindy know this? And, and that image of her, because there is a sense of vulnerability. Yeah. I'm glad that we are perceiving it the same way. We're on the same page about like how comfortable she feels. And yet there is a sense of vulnerability that I feel it's definitely there. And I think that sense of vulnerability is what's being mirrored back to us, back to the viewer, the receiver of the medicine of this art of work, not the actual, subject.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause it makes me wonder, cause I know both you and I are pretty introverted. We like to spend time alone. We're very like protective of our time and who we spend time around. And I wonder if there was a, very extroverted person looking at this, if they would see that as she looks really lonely and sad because she's alone,
Right.
But I see that as like, oh, I love being alone.
I
So it's delightful to be alone.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And when I zoom out and look at like, when I'm not focusing on her inside and I'm sort of zooming out, there is both. I feel like what's coming up for me is this idea that we can be sad and happy in the same moment. We can hold space for opposite emotions because it's like I see comfortableness, I see confidence, I see just this level of being grounded. And I also, at the same time, I can go to the place of claustrophobia and loneliness and sort of like being cold. And, so I feel that it's both. That's what I get from it. It's like you can have space for two opposite ends of emotions at the same time.
yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, but the paintings on the interior or on the lid, one of them looks like a sunrise and the other one looks like a sunset.
Oh yeah.
And the islands are all in the same place, so I think it's the same scene depicted at 2 different times a day. So that kind of shows that dichotomy too, of the both and.
Oh, I love that. And do you think like, because on the sunrise, I see like these little figurines, but I'm not sure if there are trees or if there are people walking,
Yeah,
like on the pilgrimage kind of.
Oh, yeah, they look like trees, but then down at the bottom, they look different.
Actually, you could see them in the bottom too. Now that like if you really zoom in, like like focus, because at first I thought, oh, I see them on the top and I don't see them on the bottom, and that's why I thought there was like people, on a walk on a pilgrimage. But now I see them. Now that you pointed them out, I do see them on the bottom too.
Yeah, the tree. Yeah, I feel like they're trees. They just look a little different at the bottom than they do up here. But then also, there's a slightly different number of trees on each one. So
right. And I think it's because of the light, like the amount of light that shines, like, when it's daytime, like sunrise versus sunset.
Oh, wait, no, if this were sunrise versus sunset, the sun would be in a different place for sunrise.
Oh.
It would be on the other side of the sky.
That is true.
We see the sun in both ones.
And this is the same exact image.
Yeah. Huh. Oh, that's disappointing. I really wanted it to be sunrise and sunset.
Well, because it reminded me of the movie Before Sun, like they did that where, that movie before sunrise and then before sunset. And they actually came back 10 years later, the actors, to do the movie. Like they literally on purpose took that long of a time to come back.
Cool.
But maybe it's the moonlight. Maybe it's not, it's still the idea of sunrise and like sun setting, but that's the moon,
Yeah, there we go.
And we're recording this on full moon eclipse. That's
perfect. Well, and then you look at the interior of the space that she's in, and the sky is blue. So, like, the sky is like a purplish pink on the top right. The bottom, it's a more orangey red, and then it's blue inside the trunk. And so that could be the daytime, like midday.
Yeah, and even just how half of her body is lighter and bright, because there's light shining on half of her body, and on the other half, it's darker.
Oh yeah, because we've got the shadows from the room that it's in, casting shadows inside of the trunk. I hadn't even noticed that. It's like my brain was like, nope, it's not part of it, but it is in a way. Like if her face were more lit up, I think it would look different. It would had a different energy.
You know what I just noticed, Cindy, is so I noticed the vertical line of like half of her body being in light and half in the dark. But then you said, well, her face and her shoulders like are actually more like in the shadow or in the shade. I should say. But then I noticed that there's also another line horizontally. So you actually have like she's divided in these like squares, like where there is a top, like shoulders and head is in one square, and then arms and legs are, part of the front, of her body's on another. And then there is the other, rectangular goes up and down, It's like there are three different like rectangulars in there, and her whole image is separated in those three rectangulars.
Yeah.
And to me, when I think of that, is the thing that comes to me when I think of like how she is like so neatly, and you're talking about it because of the shadow of the top of or just the way that the light is hitting it.
Yeah, the shadow. I'm seeing what you're talking about, like this line here, and then this line, and then like this line here, kind of dividing her.
Oh, I didn't even notice that line.
Oh yeah. I guess this one. Were you thinking like this is one?
I saw it as a one rectangular, but the line that you just pointed out, it's like a triangle basically, like, and the tip of it is going straight into her left breast, which is the heart, right? That's where inside of the heart. And what I notice is that the inside of the trunk is green, and green is a color that represents the heart chakra. So it is, and it's interesting because when it comes to her being naked, the only thing that we see that is revealing is only her left breast.
Yeah.
And that's the side where the heart is. So there is this theme of vulnerability and, opening your heart up. And yet her body is like, closed off. But at the same time, she's very comfortable because you can literally see her left breast. And there is a lot, I feel like, in this piece of art, there is this invitation about tapping into our heart and seeing what it reflects back to us about our relationship with love and our relationship with vulnerability and our relationship with opening your heart up and just being able to, without deflecting and without feeling like you have to protect your heart. Because it's like you can see her position as the only thing that she's allowing to just be seen is her left breast.
Yeah. And as you're talking, it made me think that the whole thing is an open container. So if we take that symbolism and expand it outward, like that trunk could be her heart. And then the opening up is allowing others to see in and also like allowing herself to see in.
I love that.
That would be a good prompt. So as I see them in these episodes, giving listeners something to write about or consider. So that would be a good thing for them to write about is what does it look like to open your heart and what messages can you get about that from this painting? So anyway, continue on. You were about
I love that. Because isn't it true that it's so much easier to keep your heart closed like a closed trunk and to not let any light come in, right? And then to have like an open trunk. I mean, the color green, to me, it's also interesting. Speaking of energy, it's even interesting in like the layers, how they come up in our awareness to start commenting on and talking about. Because I noticed the color green way before, but it didn't register and didn't like activate for me and what it represented until like a few minutes later.
Yeah.
To start talking about it. And then that, like the order in which I commented on it allowed for you to go, oh, and then the trunk itself is like symbolizes that open heart. So I feel like when we are interacting with a work of art and allowing its medicine to do its magic on us, the layers of awareness that come up and the order in which they come up, it's its own magical thing. Like you can't like rush it, and you can't like see the thing that you saw half an hour later. You couldn't have seen it, half an hour before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen this true time and time again. Like I did a whole episode with Megan Winkler a few episodes back, and we spent the entire time talking about this artwork. I took the artwork to the Art and Connection Self Connection Circle, and they saw something completely different. So I'm sitting here like, what? Like I really spent an hour talking about this artwork. But that's what happens. That it's the power of community around an artwork too, is that conversation where, you say something, it allows me to see something, it allows me to look at the artwork in a different way, which then allows me to reflect that back. And then that comment, it's this beautiful feedback. And I've seen it happen with students, and I've seen it happen with like all age people. Entering into a conversation about a work of art can just bring so much insight.
Wouldn't you say that that's kind of like the whole point, that the piece of art exists and the activation of what's in that piece of art happens because of our interaction with it? Just something that you talk about, and I've learned, from you to like go, to like be even more grounded in that idea.
Yeah.
Like we activated with the fact that you see something different and I see something different. It's just proof that the art is there, and the artist has its own relationship with it, but then the artist releases it out into the wild, and then your interpretation of it and what it brings out in you, your activation of it, becomes like you can have the same artwork would be like, and have 20 people, and it would be 20 different artworks.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's what it's been true for a lot of like the art history classes I took in college, because my undergraduate degree is in art history. And most of those classes were, here is the information about the artwork, learn it, memorize it, see it in the art. But none of it was ever about what happens when I look at it. Like, what am I seeing? And I think that's changing. I'm hearing, that's one of the things I'm trying to change is with my work with teachers. But it's caused a lot of people to be really closed off when looking at art. They think they're missing something, that they have to have all this extra information, but really all you need is just yourself and what you bring to it. And once the artwork leaves the artist's hands, it really becomes the viewer's, in whatever we make of it is our truth. And yeah,
I feel like you're missing the whole point, honestly. If as a art teacher, you're going, okay, here, read it, memorize it, and that's that. Like, it's like there's a whole other life that it's meant to be had by how we interact with it.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because when I first saw this image that we are looking at and we're activating the magic of, my first instinct was like, ooh, and of course I saw the word dad, and I'm like, God, like that just happened to me last night. But then going through the activation process of all the layers of how I'm interacting with it, how you are interacting with it in my presence, it makes it's like it has transformed it into a completely different work of art.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting for me to look back at, the podcast conversations that I've had and the ones coming up, is how many of them we started somewhere completely different than where we ended up. And I would say most of them probably, I can think of many that we started thinking it was one thing. And by the end of it, we were like, oh no, this is something completely different. And if we had stopped at, that first glance and our first interpretation of it, we miss out on, so much more that's available to us.
Yeah, which then the relationship with time comes in, which I mentioned at the beginning in terms of the work that I do, like actually spending time with that piece of art. It starts to reveal the layers and it starts to transform it. Art is not meant. And I'm having an aha moment right now, because if you come to my home, I literally have one piece of art and the rest of the walls are like literally bare. And I've had this conversation with myself around, if I commit to putting art on my walls, what if I get like, it's like the same, you're looking at the same art, and what if I like just get, bored with it or whatever. And I'm just having this aha moment that the more that piece of art hangs on the wall, as I change, that piece of art changes. It's not the same piece of art that you hung, 10 months ago,
Yeah.
or even 10 days ago, it changes. And so like, it's bringing a new spaciousness that I love about like, yeah, this idea of commitment, committing to a work of art. It can go
Yeah.
much deeper than that. And the other thing that it's interesting, I love that you said to me, this is actually a sculpture, an installation inside a room, because I thought all of it that I just see in the image is that piece of art, that part of the art, right? Part of the artwork. But would you also say that what you felt inspired to put inside the frame
Mm.
creates its own art? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you decided to crop whatever you cropped and leave whatever you left. And now I can't help but have a relationship with a space around this trunk, this art installation. And I'm looking at the window and the relationship of like the scale of the window with the scale of the
Yeah.
trunk. And you would think like the window represents openness and spaciousness and like just air, and all that. And then the trunk represents like closing things, closing them into the trunk. And yet the trunk is the one that is much bigger than the window and has that spaciousness. And the window is so tiny compared to the trunk. And the relationship between the window and the trunk, what it brings up for me is pretty much what we've been saying in a way. It is our relationship with things, with what we see, that activates what they are, activates the energy of it, is not the actual thing. Because I wouldn't think of a trunk as being spacious
Yeah.
and airy. I would think of a window. And yet the window is so tiny compared to does that make sense?
It does. And I have two thoughts that I don't want to forget the second one.
Yes.
So I'm going to write it down real fast. But it does feel very spacious to me because when I think about, I keep asking myself this question, and I was going to ask you it whenever it came up. But if I were to imagine that she were to stand up, is she trapped in the trunk, or would she actually be able to stand fully up? What's your feeling on that?
If she were to stand up inside the trunk?
Yeah, in this space that she's in right now, would she stay in this landscape, or is she stuck in that position?
My feeling is that she would bump her head. She would not be able to stand up straight. And my feeling is that she's bigger than the trunk, you know? And yet when you see her, just her, like her body language, you don't feel that she is stuck or that she is uncomfortable. It's again, it's like the holding the two opposite ends of the spectrum in one, I think. What do you think?
I think that she could stand up. I somehow feel that this is a magic trunk because it fits an entire landscape. It fits mountains and suns and water and tiny trees and a giant girl, that I just feel like if she were to stand up, she could stand up and walk through the space, and that like she could walk out of view, and then we would just be seeing three views of the landscape. And then
I love that you said, because it's an extension of what I just said when I compared the window to the side with the size of the trunk. I love that you said like this trunk, it's like a mat. First of all, I love that you use the word magic, but like you said that it's, what is the word that you used?
expansive?
It has, like you said, like it has like it fits all the mountains and the water, all these images. And I love that you looked at it that way, because I looked at it very much of like logical and black and white, where I was like, well, Cindy, that's just painted on the door. You know what I mean? I didn't go beyond the black and white thinking of it,
Yeah.
But come on, it like if we're looking at the symbolism of it, like, hello, of course. And yeah, and from that perspective, I can see her just walking in, walking around and in that world and just being able to. And so when you say that, what comes up is this sentence comes up: we are never stuck. We are never stuck, you know? Like I imagine her like walking, standing up and walking, and you said you're walking sort of like in and out of view, like walk and like go wherever she wants to go.
And now I imagine her crawling out of the trunk and then being in the gallery space too. Like she can.
That's what I first imagined, right?
Yeah.
Like she would like get out and like the trunk, she's much bigger. She's bigger than the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea that if we think we are stuck is just our belief that we are stuck. We are never stuck. That's what comes really strongly from that.
I love it.
And I have to say that my OCD brain kind of loves because of the way you have cropped the image, kind of loves like how the spaciousness of the room. Because like it looks like an empty room and just this, and again, for me, what comes up is we can create space inside of us, inside our spaces, inside of our, our living spaces. And if we feel claustrophobic, it's because we need to release what's feeling like it's taking our breath away, not in a good way,
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I wrote down when I had the two thoughts was, because this is a sculpture and because it's in this empty room, we could walk around it. And normally if I have a picture of a sculpture, I would show it from many angles, but I couldn't find pictures of it from many angles. So I don't have that. But I imagine that experiencing this sculpture in person would be a completely different experience because we could see from the back. And imagine because right on the right side, you can see there's kind of a doorway or a entrance. Our first experience of this artwork might be we're looking at the back of a trunk standing on its end, and then it's activated as we walk around it. We then see what's in the trunk. So there's like that mystery and that surprise element that would be present if we were to get to see this in real life.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And how would our experience of this be different if we were in the room versus looking at an image? Like what would come up? The other thing that has stood out to me, but I haven't said it, it's interesting, right? Like the obvious things, sometimes we ignore and not comment on and not share. This idea that the trunk is standing on its end, as opposed to usually trunks, you have them horizontally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like if I were to go inside that trunk, I would like be flipping it. I mean, for it to go to, you know what I mean? Like to go horizontally. And if I was putting my weight inside of it, right? And it's interesting because the artist could have chosen to do it horizontally. And as you're walking around the sculpture, you would be like looking inside, but it is actually like a door.
Yeah, it's more of like an entryway where you can kind of walk in, whereas instead of like standing over it and looking down into it, that changes the whole experience of looking at it.
Yeah, and because it does look like a door that you can open the door, or like to go back to what I was saying in terms of like what the one-liner for me is that I would take away from it is the message of like, you are never stuck. You're not stuck. To be able to open the door and just go out, as opposed to like being like having it be horizontal. I'm getting images of like a coffin, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's a very different experience.
Yeah.
If you are lying there horizontally.
Yeah, that feels more confining or trapping or stuck if it were laying horizontally.
Yeah. Although you can also argue that if it was horizontal, it's like how we sleep, it's horizontal, right? And so there is a level of comfortableness with that, and a level of like, because I see that this trunk standing on its end, like vertically, and there is a part of me that feels like, oh gosh, it's going to fall down. Because if it was horizontal, you have the largest part standing on the ground, and there is a level of being grounded, and
Yeah,
there's a level of safety that you don't get if you're like standing vertically. And there's
that's
that
interesting.
relationship too, right?
Yeah.
It might be
Although
easier to
I,
get out, but I don't know.
yeah, although I imagined if it were on its ground, I imagined the lid like snapping closed for some reason. I'm like, oh, then the lid might, but it probably has a mechanism to keep it open.
It comes back to like the claustrophobia of it all.
A safety latch or of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting because I actually noticed like the first thing that I start commenting on when you asked me was the metal latches and the metal work, like that serve the function of closing the top. And I don't know, they really stand out for me. They seem like rather large. And there is a sense of like, even though metal is cold to the touch, there's also a sense of safety. Like, it doesn't seem like they would, I mean, it could go both ways. They could like close shut and like feel like you can get out of there, but also like they are big and sturdy. So like they wouldn't, I don't know.
Yeah. It's like she has choice to like protect herself or to open it. Like I feel like she has full like agency here and that I guess we could close her in, but I feel like this is like maybe just more symbolic. I guess I'm still like, oh, this is her heart. Like I'm viewing this entirely as this is her heart ever since, or like, her in, I don't know the order of these episodes, but in the episode that I had with Angie, we talked about finding home within your heart or in yourself. And there was these structures in the heart space. And so I love that this ties back to that. So listeners, if you haven't listened to that episode, they're related because.
Yeah. And I wonder if you go and listen, which is what I'm going to do. If you listen to this episode, like do a marathon of it, the way you have been guided to choose the artwork. And then for the person sitting across from you to go, okay, I'm going to go with this one. And then to string all these chosen artworks in the way that they are being strung through your podcast to see what the story is, once you're done with this season of the podcast, to see what is the story, and to see the connection of the messages, because I believe that you are being guided through through your intuition and through your magic. You're being guided to choose them. And like you said, if from the four of the ones that you chose, that you gave me as an option, you kind of knew this was going to be the one, you have that connection with what the person sitting across from you is going to choose on some level. And there is a story that is being told through all the podcast episodes.
I think that's true too, because I have had episodes or interviews scheduled and I couldn't find the art. I was like, I'm not ready yet. Like, I know I will be. I know I will find the art, but I don't want to just show you anything. I want it to be what feels energetically right for me to present to you. And if it doesn't feel right, I'm not going to do it. So I had to reschedule one. I was like, I will schedule you again, but I need to be confident in the art selection that I give you, because that is the whole thing.
Yeah. And I wonder what story, I mean, I know you're writing your book right now. And so there is that writing aspect, but like when you look back on these podcast episodes, see like, what is this, you know what I mean? Like I can imagine like a little book coming out of like with all the messages of this.
I can too. It's really good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For you, if I may. So when you look at this work of art, is it something that you would have in your space, in your home, in your office? Would this be something that you would want to have in your space?
I probably not, because it takes up so much space. And I don't like a lot of clutter and things. I have friends who have like a lot of furniture, and I have the amount of furniture I need. Like it has to have a function, so a big sculpture in my space would feel kind of oppressive to me.
Yeah. And what if this was a painting?
Yes. Yeah. I think so. I do really resonate with the energy of it, and I find a lot of personal connections, and it's kind of different. I like things that are, and it has a lot of good colors that I would be looking for. Yeah, I would.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I love Speaking of color, the wood of the trunk, like, and then the green of the velvet, like I'm imagining
Yeah.
it to be velvet I keep saying velvety green, like the green of the inside of it, like the two main colors in nature.
Yeah.
Right. And so that I don't think that, and then the blue of the sky, like that's not like this trunk, you look at it as the open heart, which is beautiful. And I'm having this image of this being like the planet,
Yeah.
like with the colors,
Yeah.
and a different kind of like, it's not a circular, it's not a sphere. It's very much with all the sharp edges and everything. But to me, it also represents Mother Nature and
Yeah.
planet. And like, and I'm thinking, is she Mother Nature? Is she like what?
Oh yeah. Because she is interacting with that tree. And I keep going back to that. I'm like, what is she doing with the tree? Is she picking it? Is she just playing with it?
It's interesting because when you said tree, that she's picking up the tree or, like looking at it, you putting it in those words gave me a completely different perspective of, because I thought it was just a flower that she was playing with.
Oh.
But if we look at it as her playing with a tree, the other thing that comes up for me is that she also represents God, create, and we keep talking about how she's like larger than like she's
Yeah.
gigantic and like larger than life,
Oh.
and we have all this nature like surrounding her, and there's the outside my window confirming that or validating. But to me, that's the other nuance that I get is like the trunk representing and the images representing planet Earth and her
Mhm. Yeah. I love that. I have
yes,
two
please.
divergent directions that I'm going to try to figure out which one. If maybe they're connected, maybe they're not. And by the time I finish this, I might have forgotten one of them. So, oh, I remember the second one. So when you were talking about the green, the entire conversation, every time I look at the green, I think of a green screen. That's the green screen color. And I was like, oh, that's silly. I'm not going to bring, that's just a thing. But then I was like, well, if we just go for it and think any idea about the art is not silly, like that green screen means that you could project any sort of image into it. So that's like a way to like insert yourself into it or your whatever you wanted really, but like that's a way in to it. So that's interesting. And then the other thought I had was I keep thinking about the size of her hands and her feet and how tiny they are. And
Oh,
then when you said she was God, I'm like, oh, I don't even know if she would even be able to stand up because her feet are so small.
that
So
is,
those are my two completely different thoughts. But
yeah, no, but first of all, the green screen thing, I love that. And my mind goes, why didn't your mind went there? Because you've studied film, for God's sakes. Like, your mind never went to the green screen.
I just have a daughter who has a green screen and talks about
Oh,
green screens a lot. So it's
no,
present in my
it's
life.
amazing because for me, that represents what we have been talking about, that the
Mm-hmm.
artwork is there for us to project, to have a
Mm,
relationship with, and to project. It gets activated when we project our
yeah.
perception
Oh,
in it. To me, like that represents, and I'm getting chills as I say that, like
yeah.
symbolizes what art is all about, that green there. It's the green screen and it's the color of the heart chakra.
Mm,
And ultimately, when we connect with art, we connect with it through our heart.
yeah.
So I love, like, that feels complete to me now. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
It's
like,
like we just tied it all together.
yes, that feels like with the green. Okay, we can put the green to the side. The feet and the hands, that is very interesting, Cindy. I have to say, I was a little triggered by her feet and her hands, but I guess I wasn't aware of like saying it
Yeah.
out loud because they look almost like hurt.
Yeah.
A little bit of
Mm,
redness on the knuckles. They look
yep.
like they could even be bloody. And like there is the use of the color, like, yeah, pink
Yeah.
to red.
I can see it on her like ankle bone and her feet. Yeah, they're also that same color. Her
And
elbow is
then
that same color too.
elbow. Yeah. And yeah, I cannot honestly, I keep thinking back about the symbolism of like this going deep into the spirituality
Mhm.
of it all with like it's reminding me of a movie with Jennifer Lawrence called Mother.
I
And if
feel like you
you
told me to watch that, and I feel like
yeah, I might have given it to you as home play when we worked together.
I'm like now I don't know if
But
I watched it, but I remember you have saying those words. Okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
it is this image, this work of art reminds me of Mother so much. So I would, for those who are resonating and are feeling like nudged, maybe go watch the movie after listening to this podcast episode. And in that movie, I don't want to give it away, but there is a lot of symbolism and like what Jennifer Lawrence's character really represents. And like, yeah, I would say if I could put an artwork tied to that movie would be this one.
I used to do that in the blog early on as I would tie artworks to books. I would capture the energy of a book and I'd find an artwork. It was fun. I should do that again. I enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So when I say I got triggered by her hands or and feet, I never noticed the size, or maybe I did and I didn't question it, or I didn't like it's also interesting what we accept when we're interacting with a work of art and how much that like what we accept and what we're willing to question or say
Yeah.
out loud.
Yeah.
And also what we are not willing to say out loud because we're afraid we're going to sound stupid.
Yeah.
And I feel that like that I think that influences and impacts how we feel intimidated by art and feel like it's for everyone else but us. Because that's
Yeah.
how I felt.
Yeah. 100%. And I also, that has been happening for me because I do every now and I go back to the feet. I'm like, what's going on with those feet? And then I'm like, it'll come up. I'll bring up the feet at some point. What's going on with those feet? And what I keep thinking of, and then I'm like, well, I don't want to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't want to project culturally, but it makes me. I know this artist is Chinese. She's a contemporary Chinese artist. And it makes me think of how they used to bind feet in China to make them small. Because if like large feet was like not a sign, I guess it was probably a sign of beauty, or I don't know the full history of it. So part of me is like, is that a commentary here? Is that involved in any way? And then I don't know if that's, if it is or isn't an influence, but it is, makes me think of it. Does make me think
What
of it.
is very interesting about what you just said is again, going back to the order in which we, connect with the reflections and the awareness that's coming up, because like I don't believe in accidents. So like the layers are coming up in a certain order for a reason. The fact that you commented on the green screen element with a green color, and then the feet, the green screen represented us interacting with the art, projecting ourselves into the work of art.
Yeah.
And the feet representing the artist, because the artist has her own relationship and has her own like projections that she does, and then she releases the art, and then it's like up to you to see what you need to see and receive from it. And it's like to me, the feet and the color green represent both of those elements.
Yeah, and that is one of the criticisms of the type of work I do. I don't get it a lot, but I have heard it, is that it is not honoring the culture of the artist and and I don't choose, for these podcasts, I make sure that it's universal themes, that we're not just going to go and like take a religious object from a country that we don't know anything about and project our own thoughts and feelings on it. That's clearly a no. But then in this case, it's a contemporary Chinese artist. So there is a lot that we don't know. And recognizing that if we were Chinese, we would have a completely different interpretation. If we lived in China and we went to this exhibit, which I think this exhibit was in China, we would have a completely different experience, because then we're going to have layers of cultural expectation and layers of society and layers of contextual information that we just don't have, being two white women who live in America.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. To me, I just love the connection between the color green and the feet. You having that knowledge. See, my mind, I couldn't have that relationship with this because I didn't have that. That wouldn't have never come up. And which is also goes to show why your Art Connection Circle container is so powerful, because like we each, the knowledge that we have and the experience that we have, we get to bring that into the experience. And I wonder if like if I were Chinese and or if a Chinese, person was to like interact with it, if like the small feet would be something to admire because of like why they find it their feet. When I look at them, I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think you do too. Or like, it's this idea of like, they're so tiny. How is she going to stand on them? Is she going to like flop over?
Yeah.
I feel uncomfortable. But then for them to culturally do that, if we are allowed to comment on that, for them to culturally do that seems like torture and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then it goes into like, how many things are we doing in our everyday life to fit a standard of beauty, even though, it might be uncomfortable or it might go against our values.
Yeah. And then that draws back into the fact that she's in this box and that she's, fitting herself into this small space. And what boxes are we putting ourselves in?
Absolutely. And you saying that makes me go, wouldn't this be like the first thing that we should have said about that? You know what I mean?
I think we were both intentionally avoiding the feet. We're like, we don't want to talk about it. We're not ready to talk about the feet yet.
Yeah. But like this idea of like putting ourselves in boxes, and and to me, when I look at this image, the rectangular shape is very present. And when I think of a rectangular shape, it's all about the sharp edges and the straight lines. So you see the window, you see the trunk, but then you have like all the curving and like of her body and the images, of the like the water and like so like the juxtaposition between like the sharp edges / straight lines with like the curves that, why was I saying that? I don't know why I mentioned that. But, this idea of the rectangular, like representing the boxes, representing like what straight lines are we trying to be, are we putting ourselves in and not allowing the wave and the flow of energy in our lives?
Yeah. So
good. I mean, to me, I feel like we can sit here for 5 hours and we will keep like, you call this trunk the magic trunk, and that is so appropriate because it feels like the trunk that you could pull things out of, and it continues. You could pull more things out of it, and you'll never run out. Like you'll never get to the bottom because it's a magic trunk. And I also think like that's also another symbolism for what art is.
Yeah.
You could come back to it after having a nice lunch and continue pick up where you left off, and you'd still be like pulling things out of it to connect with. Don't you feel?
Oh yeah. And I think you and I could come back a year from today and record this again with the same artwork and have a completely different discussion, because not only do we have the conversation that we just had in our memory, but we have another year of life and experiences and things to pull from, that it would add new layers of meaning that we don't have today.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that I love about what you are doing with your podcast is that, first of all, I forgot the part about where I would have to choose. I could have the choice of choosing like one out of like the 4 or the 3 or whatever. It's, interesting because of my experience last night and my conversation with my dad. Like I was led to this. And so if we were to come back a year later, I wondered like where I would be in my life because of that conversation that I had with my dad, and how I would interact with this work of art differently,
Yeah. Okay. Now I want to look at the title, because that is one thing that drew you in. But again, this is not the title of The
This is the title of
artwork.
the exhibit.
The title of
Yes.
the exhibit, it says The Real Deal is Talking with Dad. Oh, yeah, that does. You just talked with Dad yesterday.
Yeah, that's, like I briefly saw it and I was like, whoa. But I have to say, it wasn't like first I saw the image and then I went to the
Hmm.
title. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I was
Yeah.
like, this is interesting. I can't, would you happen, I guess, would it be hard to know what the title of the actual art
I
is?
tried to find it and I
I think,
failed. So I probably will try again, especially knowing that this is the one you chose. But I don't even found it on her website. And then I
mm,
searched for her art online to see if I could find more pictures of this. And
mm,
on her website was the only place I could find a picture of this artwork. So, yeah, and it didn't have the title. So I'm going to try,
yeah.
but I don't have confidence. That's the thing about contemporary art. I mean, this is from 2018 in another country. It's harder to get information about the art,
Mm,
which is good in a way. Like, we don't have any art historical text about this artwork. We all have the image and that's all we have. And I
yeah.
love that freedom too that gives us. There's no one that's going to say, "Hey, this is what the artist thought," because we don't have that. It's not written down anywhere that I can find anyway. So,
Yeah. I love that you use the word freedom in the context in which you use it, because to me, of course, leave it to me to choose something that would feel and seem so foundational. Because to me, this work of art, just everything that we talked about so far, just talks so much about your passion and your medicine and why you have come here to do what you do with art, and and what you are here to to give to others. This work of art represents so much of that, of what art is about. And when you said the word freedom, again, the juxtaposition between what's going on inside the trunk versus like how, from our perspective, when we look at this image and what you have cropped out of it, how empty the room feels and looks. And like there is so much freedom in the room outside of this trunk, like just, and then where you can find freedom inside the trunk as well,
yeah.
It's the different layers of it.
Yeah, and to apply the word freedom to a person inside of a trunk is just
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense, but then it makes complete sense at the same time. Okay, so do you feel like there is anything about this artwork that is left unsaid? Is there anything that's calling you to before we wrap up?
Yeah, I feel like if we continue this conversation, if this was going to be one of those podcasts where it was like 5 hours per episode, I feel like we could say more. And at the same time, I feel like, gosh, I would be interested in someone else, looking at it, or you even having this conversation with someone else in your
Hmm.
podcast,
Oh,
see
yeah.
what comes up. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's something. I don't know if you've thought about like taking the same piece of art and, having that conversation, because I feel like it's the magic and the nature of art that there is always more to say.
Yeah. Well, and that is one of the things that we are, or I say I am adding is in this. So I don't know when your episode is being posted. So it will have already aired, but we are inviting listeners to send audio recordings or voicemails with their thoughts about the artwork. So if they thought of something that we didn't notice, or if they had a completely different meaning, they can send us in an audio message, and then we'll play it at
That's
the end of
amazing.
an
Oh,
episode.
that's
So
amazing.
I'm about to air I'm recording this November 8th. So the one that's coming out this week will have it's my friend Madeline who was like, I listened to the whole thing and she thought something totally different. So we're gonna put in her
Oh,
message,
that's
and then hopefully we'll
amazing.
get more people to do that. So
You get
listeners,
to release you get to
please do
release
that.
them as podcast episodes, like the audio recordings, like
I'm
as
gonna
a
put them at
bonus.
the end of like another episode. So
Got
at the end
it.
of the other episodes, you can hear people's thoughts.
Yeah.
So
That's
that'll be
beautiful.
cool.
Because that adds to the story and adds to the like
Yeah.
that's amazing. And do you provide the work of art in the notes of the podcast so that we
Yes, we
link
put a
it?
link to it in the show notes.
Got
Yep.
it.
So they can
That's
see it. Yep.
beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I feel complete with it if you do.
Yeah,
And
I think we could keep going, but I don't think we need
so
to.
yeah, no, exactly. And it's funny when I said that, I just look at the image and I look at, the woman or the girl inside the trunk. And I heard and felt this energy of like, you can leave me alone now. I want to go back to my world.
I love that.
That came from her, like, okay, bye-bye now.
All right. I'll click stop share.
Let's honor the art.
She gave you the message. We were going to listen to it. Awesome. Okay. So before we go, can you tell our listeners where they can interact with you online if they're interested in learning more about your work?
Yeah, thank you.
Where should we send them?
You will find me. My relationship with social media is changing every day, I feel like. But you can find me on Instagram at Yola Mehmeti. And now I'm like panicking that's not, but I need to check because that's my handle, because that's how in touch I am with my social media. Give me 1 second.
We'll link to it in the show notes you
can link to it. But on Instagram, that would be the best. And then you can also email me at yola@yolamehmeti.com.
Awesome. And
those are the places. I don't have a website that is like a living, breathing website. I have my own versions of a website. And so when people get in touch with me, I get to share, they can learn about me when I share things with them. So that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. And for anyone who's intrigued or is curious, I highly recommend working with Yola. So if you're feeling called to, you're being called to for a reason, and act on it because it's life-changing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. This has been so invigorating and amazing. And I can only imagine what happens when you do this work. Yeah. Like, this is just a sampling of what you do with your client. What happens when you do this, when you show up for this on a weekly and bi-weekly basis to dive deep, because it's very magical. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I loved it.
I loved it too.
Thank you so much for listening to Art and Self. And if you loved what you heard, please consider leaving me a rating or a review on iTunes. And share this episode with one friend who you know needs to hear what we talked about today. You will find links to the artworks that we discuss over at the show notes at artandself.com. And you can also join my email list to get notified of all of the new upcoming episodes. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Cindy Needs Art. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time.